Hi, this is Kurt Bennick, Senior Editor for Equipment Today. In this segment of the transportation chain, we will be discussing the recent changes to the hours of service regulations issued by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. There are 4 significant changes. First, the new rule expands the short haul exemption to 150 air miles and allows a 14-hour work shift to take place as part of the exemption. Second, it expands the driving window during adverse driving conditions by up to an additional 2 hours. Third, it requires a 30-minute break after 8 hours of driving time instead of on-duty time, and allows an on-duty non-driving period to qualify as the required break. And fourth, it modifies the sleeper berth exemption to allow a driver to meet the 10-hour minimum off-duty requirement by spending at least 7 rather than 8 hours of that period in the berth, and a minimum of off-duty period of at least 2 hours spent inside or outside of the berth, provided the 2 periods total at least 10 hours, and that neither qualifying period counts against the 14-hour driving window. The new rule would not increase driving time and would continue to prevent commercial motor vehicle operators from driving more than 8 consecutive hours with at least a 30-minute change in duty status. New updates to the federal hours of service rule will speed up construction of the transportation improvement projects while maintaining road safety. To learn more, we talked to Nick Goldstein, Vice President of Regulatory and Legal Issues for the American Road and Transportation Builders Association. Hi, this is Kurt Bennick. I'm a senior editor with Equipment Today magazine, and we're here with Nick Goldstein, Vice President of Regulatory and Legal Issues of the American Road and Transport Builders Association. Nick, I understand in terms of hours of service, there's been some major changes in the hours of service rule, or some major updates. Can you tell us a little bit about the updates?
Sure. There have been. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration recently promulgated an update to the hours of service rules. This is something that ARTBA, the American Road and Transportation Builders Association, we had been advocating for increased flexibilities to the rules for some time now. The reason being that, the hours of service rules were designed for long-haul truckers. They've been kind of applied to, as I'm sure a lot of folks listening to this know, they've been applied to all trucks, including transportation, construction vehicles, which aren't driven on a long-haul basis, but, are driven for shorter amounts of time per day. And in fact, oftentimes, are powered on but remain idle on a construction site. So, their hours of service clock would be still going. So yes, the new rule, which was, I believe it was officially printed in the Federal Register on June 1st, and it'll go into effect here in a couple of months. It makes 4 changes. One is to increase what's called the short haul exemption, which is the exemption from the rule for vehicles that do not travel, great distances, as I was talking, and it increases that from 100 to 150 air miles. The second change is that it allows, so drivers under the rule have to take mandatory 30-minute rest breaks. It allows those drivers that are on break to still participate in non-driving activities. So you can be on a break and you can be, checking your paperwork or things like that, and that still counts towards the 30-minute mandatory rest break. Third, it increases the flexibility that drivers have when driving in adverse weather conditions. So I believe what it does is it tacks on 2 hours there for adverse weather conditions. That I'm not as familiar with. And the fourth change, which I'm also not as familiar with, just because it does not impact ARTBA members as much as it may other segments of the regulated community that are affected by the rule, but it does increase flexibility for use of sleeper berths to satisfy, breaks under the rule or stopping your vehicle under the rule and using your sleeper berth in your truck.
Okay, and for construction contractors, is the biggest benefit going to be the air mile radius rule?
Yeah, both the air mile radius and the allowance of non-driving activities to satisfy the rest break. Because, oftentimes, as I said, what will happen is we'll have a piece of equipment that's on but not moving on a construction site, but it has to be kept on because they're loading, they're unloading, or it's storing a material that equipment will still be on, so the driver can still get timed out for hours of service. So this way, there's a little more flexibility there where a driver can be participating in some sort of non-driving activity while they're on that break. So that's also of importance to us as well.
Are there benefits from the increasing the air mile radius rule because you don't have the restrictions that you have? I understand when you're operating under a short haul exemption, if you didn't have that exemption.
Yeah, I think, that just increases, the ability because, again, workers may have to travel between job sites and such, and this gives them more flexibility to do that by increasing that air mile radius, by a third or by half from 100 to 150. You're upping that by, 50 additional air miles, which is quite significant. So that allows them more flexibility to go between job sites during the day and to do what they have to do without having to, become impacted by the hours of service rule. Now, there's one thing I should mention there. We did ask for a change. So the agency had asked when they originally proposed the changes, whether or not in order to qualify for that short haul exemption, the driver would have to return to their original workplace. We had said no, we didn't think that should be the case, and that's the case right now. So they were asking if they should remove that requirement. We had said they should remove the requirement because we didn't feel like there was anything that makes the original starting point more or less safe than whatever starting point the driver ends their day at. Now, they chose not to do that, so that requirement does still remain in place. We still approve the changes that they made, but in order to take advantage of the short haul exemption, as with before, the driver must still report back to their original starting location.
In terms of the break, does that solve a lot of other issues? When I talked to some people who ran service trucks or technicians' trucks, that was a real sticking issue there where you had to have somebody on standby in case somebody timed out. Does that help solve that issue?
I believe that it does because the drivers can do more while they're on their break. They can, again, participate in those non-driving activities while they're on their break. And, I should point out, too, that, one of the reasons that we advocated for these changes is, again, with transportation construction, our members are often asked to do complicated jobs in a very short period of time. There's a reason they don't want this construction going on during rush hours and stuff, so they give you small windows of time to do it. So any increase in the hours of service rules help that.
In terms of additional changes, was there anything else that your members brought up about it? I imagine that most of your members are really happy about the hours of service changes. Have you had any feedback at this point?
We think this is a very positive development. It's an acknowledgement of what we've been telling the agencies for some time now, which is basically that transportation construction workers are not long-haul drivers. These rules were not meant for transportation construction. And, we've seen that as well you go onto a job site now and there are all sorts of pieces of equipment that are exempt from the rules. And for good reason. I think some asphalt equipment is exempt from the rules. Some ready-mix concrete equipment is exempt from the rules because they're not the type of equipment that's driven for long periods of time that you need an hours of service rule for. And so we think that these changes are just another step in that direction, in recognizing what we've been telling the agency is that the transportation construction community is not who these rules were meant for.
You happy with all exemptions? Are there still areas that you guys are looking at for improvements?
We're very happy with what FMCSA did. There's always room for improvement. I think the ideal would be a uniform exemption for transportation construction, and we will keep pushing towards that end. But that's not to say that what has happened here is very positive. It recognizes that we need increased flexibility in order to operate in a safe manner. Again, when I was talking to you about types of jobs that transportation construction workers are asked to do in very short amounts of time, over the span of 24 to 48 hours, oftentimes the hours of service rule detracts from the overall safety of that effort by forcing us to time out drivers when they haven't driven over a long period of time. We're forced to time out and change workers, forcing them to take more time in a work zone for a job where that time is a precious commodity and they need to get in and out as fast as possible for safety reasons having to do with both the workers and the motoring public.
Now, is there anything unique about the current environment that this really comes along at a good time to help out with the contractors at this particular time, or?
The changes that we're talking about have been in the works for years, so they predated the pandemic. But that said, I mean, we have seen since March, when 8 federal agencies started reacting to the pandemic, FMCSA has, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, has provided hours of service waivers for truckers that are carrying materials necessary for recovery efforts or for hospitals, that sort of thing. I believe, they've extended hours of service waiver. I think they're on their second or third emergency extension for, overall waivers to help make sure things are getting where they need to go to help recovery.
I'm trying to remember, when was the last change in hours of service? When the current regulations that we're modifying now, how long have they been in place?
That's a good question. It's been some time. I honestly don't know how long it's been, and it wasn't on this grand of a scale. Okay. I don't think. I think this is one of the biggest sort of changes to the rule we've seen in some time. I seem to remember in the early 2000s, there were a couple of changes made to the rule, but I don't think they were as big a changes as what's just happened.
How did you settle on 150 miles versus 100 miles? How did they settle on that number? I mean, was it an arbitrary number? Do most contractors work within that 150 mile radius?
Well, no, I don't think it was arbitrary. I think that the agency reached out. This has been a multi-year effort on their part. They've conducted listening sessions, public comment sessions. So, based on the feedback that they got from the regulated community, and there were thousands of comments, I believe, submitted to the docket, a number of different listening sessions that they did around the country. So with the data that they received from those sources, they came up with 150 air miles. And, that's something that, our members at least have been happy with that.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about the changes to the hours of service and how it impacts your association?
Just that, overall, we think it's a very positive development, and we think it recognizes that transportation construction is different from long-haul trucking, and that it allows flexibility that our members need to, continue to improve transportation in this country while still maintaining, necessary safety standards.